Hello, it's Philip Taylor speaking from Richmond Green Chambers in London. This afternoon I'm looking at a book that's come to us from Edward Elgar Publishing, a family independent publishers based down in the West Country. They've come up with a really excellent book which I found very, very interesting to read. It's very clear. It was full of a lot of clarity of thought, I felt. The title of the book is European Union Chemicals Regulation. It's got a subtitle, New Governance, Hybridity and REACH. And I'll explain what REACH is if you've not heard about it in a minute. That's R-E-A-C-H, and it stands for a number of things. The book's been written by Steven Vaughan. It's available as an eBook and as an online book through the Elgar online series. Now, my wife Elizabeth and I looked at the book and we had a chat about it, and we've come up with this title for our review. At last, a clear and scholarly examination of REACH in European Union environmental law. And that's really what the book is about. Now, our review is relatively short. This is the book. It's a hardback, spine and in the back. There's a bit of detail, a few quotes on the back. It runs to just over about 250 odd pages. There's quite a good index at the back. It's on actually page numbering, it's not on paragraph numbering, so you can find things quite quickly. There's an appendix, the road to REACH itself, which is there. I'll just get to the back bit. There we go. That's the timeline from the start in 1972. And again, you can see some footnoting at the bottom there. There isn't paragraph numbering, but there are subheads which you can find, and as I said, there's quite a lot of detailed referencing in the various chapters. You can see there's an example of a chapter there. If we go to the front, there's a nice dedication which you can see there, which I'll mention, and then you've got the book itself. Then you've got the contents. There are 10 chapters in total. Instead of calling conclusions, he calls it final thoughts, which I think is quite interesting for a change. Then there's the appendix at the back, of course. There are some figures and tables which are listed there. Then there's a preface, which is actually quite interesting. And then you go into abbreviations, which are, again, very helpful to get some idea of what we're actually talking about. You can see how detailed that is. There's quite a lot of it there, again. And then you've got some cases and legislation. It is a bona fide law book, this one, without a doubt, a lot of information. Then you get the introduction right here. He starts off, we eat them, we breathe them. They seep into our skin without our knowledge or permission. Every day we come into contact with hundreds of natural and synthetic chemicals. Now read on. And you see there you've got the useful footnotes. So you see he starts off quite well. Then you've got Chapter 2, Chemicals and Chemicals Regulation. And then we get into the heavy stuff quite quickly. It's a detailed book. It's not for the faint-hearted, and it's one of those books which actually is not easiest again to read, but I thought the way he expressed himself was very, very clear, and I think that was extremely helpful for someone like myself who's not actually got a tremendous working knowledge of this area. I'm well aware of quite a lot of things that have been happening, but I did find that it added to the sum total of my understanding of what he was trying to put forward. This is what we say anyway about the book. The author of this book, Steven Vaughan, admits that chemicals regulation is not one of the hot subjects in environmental law. It does not have quite the same cachet, he says. And he says, as, for example, say, climate change or environmental justice. However, as he points out in this succinct yet detailed introduction, chemicals and their regulation should obviously preoccupy us more than they do. There are more than 100,000 of them out there. Chemicals we mean, some of which, as he says right at the beginning, we eat, breathe or absorb through our skin. They are part of nature, yet some are hazardous. Over 40,000 of them may pose a minimal risk, hence the growing need for EU chemicals legislation, which aims to generate information about impacts and protection against potential harms. The European Union has therefore adopted a number of legislative instruments aimed at the control of chemicals across a range of commercial sectors. And of course we need to know about this information, not just as lawyers, but I think in a much wider area as well. So this book will have, I think, a wider impact than just merely for lawyers. The focus then of this monograph, as he calls it, as the subtitle indicates, is on the subject of REACH, R-E-A-C-H. That's the European regulation on registration, evaluation, authorization and restriction of chemicals. So R-E-A-R, we missed the bit of the R, and then the CH is for chemicals, so hence REACH, which came into force in 2007. Its regulator is the ECHR, which is the European Chemicals Agency, ECHA. Okay, so that's got rid of some of these abbreviations. So REACH, says the author, is a daunting piece of legislation. Quote, one of the longest legislative instruments in the history of the European Union, and ideally requires a familiarity with toxicology to fully understand it, which is why, as the author suggests, it has engendered little in the way of significant academic writing to date. Well, he's sorted that out, and it's a very good book that he's produced. The book, therefore, does much to fill that gap and deserves full marks for the clarity of its writing and explanation. And I'd like to thank Edward Elgar very much for producing these books. We as practitioners and researchers can't do without them. They're extremely helpful in our deliberations, and I'm very grateful to all the people at the company for producing this work for us, so thank you to them. There is then the subject, if we go back to the book, of hybridity, which is explained in a number of ways, including the existence of public and private regulation. Now, perhaps if you think back to tort law, things like public and private nuisance and so on, you've got to think again about the two links between public and private matters. And I think that's an important thing to bear in mind in anything actually to do with environmental matters. Because in the past, I think the view was quite often that the state didn't get too heavily involved in what was going on because they just left the businesses to get on with it in the private sector. Those days have gone, and obviously we're now looking very much at both private and public regulation to deal with issues, if I can put it that way. So primarily, however, the book concerns itself with the yoking together of hard and soft norms as the result of a shift to new governance, which is a favourite word again, governance, which in fact means overseeing things, which will be familiar to governance scholars at whom the book is partially aimed. And of course I would say governance here means regulation in that sense. The trouble is we do have a lot of these what I call these Euro words coming in, which is a problem because we sometimes may have preconceived notions of what some of these words actually mean. You've got to picture them in your mind, and then you've got probably a better idea of what they actually mean. There's little doubt then, if I may conclude on this, that legal practitioners, especially those who are environmental lawyers, also consultants, academics and policymakers, will come to regard this book as an important and accessible explanation of REACH, and also a useful starting point for further research on European Union chemicals legislation. It's not an issue that's going to go away. I think it's important for us to know about it because I suspect there's going to be a lot more legislation in this area in future. The publication date is cited at 2015. Let's just have a quick look at the book again. Front, spine and the back, and in the middle, just open it up in the middle, the ECHR library. There we go, registration, evaluation and role of information under REACH. So there's a lot of information. I suppose they could have given it a slightly better title, which could have been, it's got REACH in the subtitle there, but I think REACH really does figure so highly in it that it's quite important. The introduction I think is well worth reading. I'm looking specifically here at hierarchy and differentiation in EU norms, and then we look then at the Lisbon Treaty in particular and some of the post-legislative guidance that's come in. The ECHR, it's the European Chemical, just check the wording on that, it's Chemicals Agency. The actual structure itself is given fairly quickly in the book. I think again that's an important area which shouldn't be overestimated. I think it's important to actually read in detail exactly what it is. And finally, let me just remind you about the appendix at the back, which has a list of the actual important dates. Well, thank you very much to Steven Vaughan and to all the people involved in the production of this book. I think it's an important book for all of us in this fairly fast-moving area of environmental law. So thank you once again to all concerned, and of course to Edward Elgar for overseeing it all. Thank you. Bye-bye.